All right, welcome everyone to another episode of Transformation Talks. Today we're going to take a little bit of a different angle in what we're doing. Usually we're talking about firms that have successfully gone through transformation and what we're doing, but today we're taking a little bit of a different approach. Today we're really going to be looking at what do firms or individuals at firms really need to do to help support this transformation as we look at everything that's going on. I'm going to say in the world, but primarily what's going on here in the States. And I've got a great panel today as we kind of look at things. So I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves so that I don't butcher everything. First on my camera is actually Amy. So Amy,
Hi,
welcome.
I'm Amy Welch. I'm a principal consultant for ITK and a mission advocacy strategist for the Center for Accounting Transformation. I'm also a senior vice president and executive producer for CPA Trendlines.
Thank you, Amy. So Amy's actually, I'm going to put it kind of our PR expert on the panel here. If you didn't read in between the lines there, Ron.
I'm Ron Baker. I'm co-host of The Soul of Enterprise, which is the radio show I do with Ed Kless for the past 10 years. And we also co-founded a new company called Threshold, where we're trying to light a lantern for the profession to bring them into the transformation economy, which I think is the next big thing that we're seeing out there.
I love that. And I have heard you talk about transformation, and I think we're definitely in alignment in a lot of the way we're viewing that, and especially in the profession. Last but not least, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Tankersley. I'm a CPA and have worked with K2 Enterprises for about the last 20 years. I also do a podcast called the Accounting Technology Lab for CPA Practice Advisor, and I've published a couple hundred product reviews. I also, in my work with K2, I've spoken in 48 states. Any of you in Vermont and Delaware, I need you. I have 2 sticky notes on that checklist that I need to work out. Okay, so I'll make you a deal. Anyway, that's Brian.
Awesome. That means you've been to Alaska. I love it.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Got to drive through the Whittier Tunnel and everything. It was really cool.
Ooh. So I'm going to give you guys some context for the inspiration of the podcast. So Brian and I were at CPA Practice Advisor Thought Leader Symposium the other month, and we ended up at the dinner table together. And I actually heard Brian ragging on one of the other people that were at the table about basically her liberal views on some of the things, and that made me want to engage him in a conversation because with everything that's been going on, we've seen politicization of so many different things. And an almost inability, which actually kind of happened at the table because the person he was talking to started going like this to him and ignoring him. But I chose to do the opposite, and I chose to engage Brian in the conversation. And as we kind of talked through that, I think we both had a great dinner discussion, walked away, I think, with insights on different approaches to things. And I thought, this is one of the things that is really missing in the world as a whole, but it's even more important in our profession because we need to look at different points of view and understand different points of view. And oftentimes we have to be able to accept others and their point of view, if not necessarily spend the whole time arguing and just kind of turning away because we have to work with them. So thank you to Amy and Ron for joining us on this as well to provide additional perspective.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Where do we want to start on this? I actually don't know. Where do we want to start on this?
It's a big topic.
Well, I think it's interesting that you first bring up that when Brian was engaging with somebody or giving his point of view about something, that the person automatically started shutting Brian out based on your description of the event. And I think I read somewhere that when you engage someone in a political discussion, for starters, if you're actually going into it to understand somebody's point of view, that makes it a lot better than just feeling automatically like, I don't agree with you, and so I'm not going to engage, and I'm certainly not going to listen. So I think that's a good place to start. How do you approach it by going in without trying to make somebody feel respected and valued, but going at it from a position of seeking to understand versus seeking to persuade, or
I,
worse,
I
insult.
I knew there was no way I was going to change this person's mind, and honestly, um, my discussion with this person, I really wanted to understand why she felt the way she did. Because I got to be honest with you here. I listen to both sides of the aisle because I learned something from what they're telling me, and I learned something from, just from the conversation. And, many times there are things that one party or another has done 20, 30 years ago that cause somebody to just absolutely hate those things, and I've been through a lot of things like that. I moved from Tennessee, rural Tennessee, to Northern California, and as a conservative in Northern California, I can assure you we were a distinct minority. Okay. And again, I want everybody to have their own opinion and to believe what they believe and to share what they share. And when I talk about politics, I listen to NPR and I watch Fox News. And I probably actually listen to more NPR than I watch Fox News. And I'll just say that I think there's I think there's real value in talking to the other people because we're never going to get along if we don't speak with each other. And we're never going to find that common ground. Okay. And, we may not be able to work on 2 or 3 issues, but that doesn't mean there aren't 20 issues that we can find a solution for. Now, I may think the solution is private charity, and you may think the solution is a social program, and that's okay. But we agree that there's a problem and we agree that something needs to be done.
Yeah, I really like what you said, Amy, about not being adversarial, but to seek to understand. One of the things I've been experimenting with is telling the person, be forewarned, I will probably take your side in this argument or in this discussion. And that kind of forces me to really engage with their ideas, not just with the person, but with the ideas and I think we get lost in that. We make it personal. I love debating ideas. I'll debate ideas with anybody, anytime, anywhere, but I don't view it as personal. Some of my best friends are completely opposite of me politically, but I understand where they're coming from and I understand how they got there. And I'm always really curious if somebody changed their mind on an issue, because we all have, and I'm interested in that process. So I just view it especially when somebody disagrees with me, like at a dinner, at a conference or something, I want to lean into that and see where they're coming from.
I almost think in those conversations, the thing, and maybe, the thing I'm looking for in that is not any kind of influence or anything like that. I think more than anything, I want to understand why, and I want to talk about the idea. And I think the idea and the why and the where you're coming from is important because you get to know that person, and then that helps you understand better why they think the way they do, why they believe the way they do. And in many cases, there's a whole story there that you would never know, that helps you understand better why they see the world the way they do.
Yeah. The other thing I find really interesting about this entire topic is, human beings, I believe, are defined by what they believe, not what they know. We're CPAs here. 3 of us are, I think, right? I'm not sure, Amy, if you are, but we know what we know. We're CPAs. We can bond over that. We can talk about common issues and all of that. To really get to know somebody, I have to know what you believe. How do you vote? Where do you stand on abortion? I mean, bring up the most contentious, hot button issues, but that will give me an idea of what you believe. And I really think that's important to understand, not just what people know, but what they believe, because that leads to more meaningful and deeper conversations, even if you don't have the same beliefs.
Interesting
That's
because
an interesting comment because that's we're taught, especially coming in, I think even at university, that those are no topics in the workplace, right? Religion, politics, like we don't go there. So I find it interesting that you're providing this advice of I really got to understand what someone believes.
Well, you don't have to start out right out of the gate with, abortion or something. I mean, you can talk about what's going on or politically. There's always, I mean, I don't know how it was in your days, you guys, but when I was at the Big Eight, we'd be out on a job and, you go to lunch with these people every day. You're out there for 2 or 3 weeks, maybe longer. You bond with them. You talk about stuff as you're doing your work. And of course, you're going to talk politics, not just what you did on the weekend or whatever. It comes up. And that's how I feel I get to know somebody, and you make a connection with them.
In doing research for this, I found this interesting quote that I wanted to share with you because it goes directly to what we're saying. It's interesting that there are topics that we're not supposed to be talking about, but at the same time, you do need to bond. So what the quote is, talking politics unearths deep core values. When we interpret those values as being challenged or undermined by those we trust or with whom we share a bond, the feelings of defensiveness, indignation, and even betrayal can be overwhelming. So I thought when we were talking about that's why this can be a tricky subject, because it absolutely approaches upon our inner beliefs, like what you were saying, as far as that defines who we are. And it can feel like in some cases, if we don't feel respected for our individual beliefs, it can feel like your inner being is being questioned.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we have to be adults about it. And more important, Donnie, to your point, we have to be colleagues. I mean, when I'm engaged with colleagues, they've already got my respect right away, just because we share something, a common body of knowledge, expertise, all of that. And if we want to talk politics, I'm okay to jump in that fray. Just be adult about it.
Good, Brian. Brian, looked like you were going to jump in there.
I think we've got to stop hating on each other as a country. It really blows me away sometimes when, because people will say, well, you can be my friend as long as you agree with me, and I don't want to be your friend then. Okay. Because I want to discuss ideas, and I get a lot from it. I learn a lot. I learn perspectives I didn't know, and sometimes I change my mind. And I get that sometimes people have emotional issues surrounding discussing particular topics. I get that. And, if that's a topic you want to talk about, that's fine. But I think you also have to be careful when somebody brings it up to not make them feel less than because they don't agree with you, and not jump into I'm going to call you 15 million names because you see the world differently than I do, and your experiences in life are different than mine. I think I think everybody has something positive to share with the world. And, part of the conversation is to try to figure out what that is you can talk about that's positive that you do this. I can ask you about your daughter's wedding, and, we can talk about things that don't mean anything. But that doesn't really help me that helps me understand that at one point you've owned an etiquette book and you've written a few thank you notes in your life. That doesn't help me understand that why you believe what you believe and what it is that makes you tick. Because sometimes you'll talk to somebody and there will be something that makes them tick that also makes you tick, and you would have never seen it coming. It came in from outer space. Maybe you like helping the homeless. Maybe you like, maybe you like to talk about travel to exotic places. Maybe there's something else in your past that's interesting about you. Like I used to be a teaching assistant for a tractor driving class at UC Davis. Not everybody knew that. Okay. Yes, there is a tractor driving class for college credit. Yes, I liked it so much I didn't take it twice. I became the teaching assistant. Okay. But there are things like that that you learn about people that not only make you laugh, but it helps you. I think it helps you connect with the other people. And again, you don't. I don't expect people to agree with me on everything. Okay, and we don't have to have a debate on an issue if it's particularly contentious. But I think the hard thing here is that given how easy it is for anything you say to anybody to create offense, I think we have to be very careful to, when we're talking to other people, to try very hard not to take offense. Okay. Even if they say something that you find offensive, I try very hard to not take offense at it. Okay. Because taking offense doesn't help anybody. Okay. You said something, again, I'm a big boy. You don't think that you don't agree with the way I think, and you think that the way I think is evil. That's great. I learned something about you. Okay. And that's fine. But I think I think in general, we only get to the places where we can collaborate with others and where we can find those things we have in common by having those hard discussions and looking at what those core beliefs are. And, again, sometimes it's uncomfortable. We have a right in this country to speak. We don't have a right to not be offended. Okay. And I assure you, there are plenty of things that have been said to me that offended me. But, I try to back up and say, I'm going to turn the other cheek and let it go because there's nothing positive going to be achieved by being offended. All it's going to do is alienate the other person and make my soul rot because I'm going to feel like I've been done wrong. Okay? The best thing to do is just to move on and talk about something else or don't talk at all. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm not going to relinquish my agency to somebody else because they offended me. I mean, that's not going to happen. They can't bully me. I'm not going to give them that power.
On the flip side, if you feel like you've offended them, how do you re-engage them in a way so as to reinforce that you're trying to understand their position versus, uh-oh, I feel like I've kind of stepped on something here. Let me back up and try to get you back into the fold so that we can have that meaningful dialogue.
If I said something wrong that offended them, then, they might be owed an apology. But if they're just offended because I expressed a viewpoint about something, I think that's on them. That tells me and the world, I think, more about them than it does me. I just don't. It's like today we're sitting around waiting to be offended. And the canary in the coal mine on this is comedians. This is why Jerry Seinfeld and a bunch of others will not play in college campuses because everybody gets offended. This is a comedy. If comedians can't, that's what they do. People say, "Oh, well, you're punching down," or you should be punching up. No, comedians' job is to punch back. They're supposed to take on all comers, make fun of everybody, ridicule. I mean, every joke is a tiny revolution, George Orwell said. And I don't know, if you're offended by a comedian, wow, you're not going to like some of the things I say. I promise you.
Well, that's why I invited you, Ron, because I know there's a bunch of people that don't like what you say. And I know you've grown a thick skin on that one. But I'm listening to this, and I actually find it really interesting. So coming from Hawaii, where we're we've always said it. I've always heard it said that in Hawaii we're the melting pot. The more experience I've had on the mainland, which now has been about 20 years, where I'm pretty working across nationally, the more I realize it really is true. And this whole comedy thing is an interesting one because in Hawaii, we make fun of every race. There's something about every race that we make fun of. It's part of the everyday jokes. Yet when I hear it and when I learned this whole concept of microaggression, I was like, oh, on the mainland, it's considered a microaggression to do this. And you've got all these people getting offended. And we're just kind of past that point in Hawaii where it's like, yeah, it's comedy. And you learn that there's not an intention to hurt. And part of that is accepting sometimes the foibles of our stereotypes, because that's what a lot of it's based on. It's just the stereotype.
Yeah, John Cleese, Monty Python fame, said all comedy is critical. And it is, and it's supposed to be. And it's critical of us as humanity. You know, there's a great line about a play being conducted in a public park in New York with actors, and there's scenes where there's fornication. And the line is, you know, the liberals are upset because the actors aren't being paid minimum wage, and the conservatives are upset because, well, I mean, it's you know, advocating premarital sex, and the libertarians are distraught that there's a public park. I mean, it's a great summation of worldviews that are sort of at odds with one another, but you know, it's also a joke.
That your comment there reminds me of our prep call where you had brought up, I think the two dichotomies of each of the perspectives as well. Do you remember what I'm referring to? Can you share that again? Because I think I think we all found that pretty insightful.
Yeah, this is from a book called The Three Languages of Politics, which I highly recommend. Short little book by the economist Arnold Kling. And he lays out an axis basically for progressives. They tend to say, and look, these are broad generalizations, so take it with a vat of salt. But I think there's some validity here. Progressives, they say, look at the world kind of from an oppressor-oppressed axis, right? And you can think about the Israeli war, you can think about the Ukraine war for this. Conservatives tend to look at a civilization versus barbarism axis. And again, look at the Israel war. And then libertarians tend to look at a liberty coercion axis. They want things to be voluntary, not be coerced by the government. Everything's got to be voluntary, the non-aggression principle, you know, do unto others type of thing. And I found his book very enlightening with those, because it gives you an understanding of where they're coming from.
You know, I think we also have to be very careful when we're talking to people. Just because somebody agrees with the liberal view or the conservative view for one particular issue, doesn't mean they agree on everything. Okay, you know,
Absolutely.
I get people talk to me all the time about this politician or that politician, and you know, I've been able to find something good about every president in my lifetime. Some of them, Jimmy Carter helped people. He, after, I didn't, I was young enough that I didn't have to live through, as an adult, hit his presidency as a child. But, he did a lot of great things after he left, and I think there are great things that can be done and great things that can be done, in the pursuit of this issue or that issue or something else. And I think we have to understand that nobody agrees with every action taken by a particular politician. Again, I mean, you talk about this, and somebody might say to a Republican, well, Halliburton and the Gulf War. And then somebody might say back to him, well, Hunter Biden's laptop, and everybody has got their share of crooks. Everybody's got their share of things. There's plenty of bad folks to go around, but I think the ideas are the important part. The why, the what was your life experience? What was your childhood like? What did, where did you grow up? What did you learn when you lived there? Because, I grew up, I lived in Tennessee till I was 16. Then I lived in Northern Cal for 5 years. And then I moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee, and I live here, and I had, and then having traveled 1.5 million air miles teaching CPE all over North America, there are at least 8 different cultures in 8 different major cultures in this country, and they all have different origins, there are different accents, there are different beliefs as to why they believe one way or another. And, I think we have to give people credit for being a whole human being that may agree with you on something and may disagree on something else, and that's okay. Because what we're trying to do here is to find that connection again and to understand what makes them tick. And, again, it's not intended to be an inquisition. But I think that Um, you know, I just really struggle with how to connect with folks. If you can't discuss the issues of the day, there's only so much talking about dogs and sports teams you don't care about that you can really do. Um, and what have you really accomplished at the end? Oh, great. Well, okay, great. You both think the Cubs stink this year. Okay, great. Well, boy, that helped us get a lot closer to working together or not working together or understanding what kind of client this person wants. And, maybe there's some synergy. Maybe there's a particular kind of client you have that you hate working with. And I love working with those folks, and looking for that bigger pie, I think is the critical thing, and looking at somebody as a whole person.
I'm not even sure we agree with ourselves over time. We change our minds and flip on topics. So yeah, I totally agree. Brian, it's a great point about you can find good in any president. I will, you guys probably remember this as well, but I think it was 1994 when the Republicans took control of Congress. Newt Gingrich was the speaker, and there was a lot of talk in the air, and I mean a lot of talk, about a flat tax. Do you remember this? Well, as practicing CPA who did taxes, I got questions left and right from every customer. How's this going to impact me? So 1 year, I think it was 95, and I did this for a few years as this debate raged on. When I went over their tax return with them, I showed them. I had the postcard tax return, and I showed them, this is what you would have paid with a flat tax. It wasn't political. I was trying to explain the difference between these two ideas. And they really appreciated that. Even if the flat tax, say, would have been lower, they said, well, I'm glad it's not that way because I like paying my taxes and I like the government services and all of that. No matter where they were on the political spectrum, they appreciated that because they could see the impact on their pocketbook. It was brought home to them rather than just talking about it, conceptually as the economy as a whole.
That's funny you mentioned that. I just recorded another podcast. I think it was literally yesterday where we were talking about what happens if we didn't have the IRS anymore. And we talked about we would have to move to a flat tax for something like that to come even close to happening. I want to revisit because I think both of you actually brought it up at different points in time about this ability to work with others. And I think that starts to become the underlying why do firms need to do this? And it's your team actually can perform much higher and much stronger as a team when everyone actually has that connection to each other. It doesn't have to be the agreement, but that connection to each other. And that's really why there is an incentive, I think, for firms, any organization, not just accounting firms, to really look at this and enable these types of conversations to occur. Because I do see some where they actually say, like, you are not to talk about this and that and whatever, because it's going to cause problems. But when you kind of flip that and go, well, if we are able to have these conversations as adults and not be offended so easily, we can actually become stronger as a team. Or maybe I can put the people together that will be stronger as a team to then deliver that better results.
Yeah, I was thinking that as we were all chatting about this, what would happen if you went to the extreme of telling your people no politics? Do not. I guarantee you they're going to talk about politics more probably if you had a rule that way, because we just don't like to be told what not to do. It's like having the secret closet that your dad won't let you near. Well, that's all you're going to be thinking about, what's in there, and you're going to go check it out. Yeah, I'm not sure it's healthy to avoid these discussions if they come up voluntarily.
The other thing that I heard come up earlier, and I think Brian said it, but I know Ron also had said it in something else too, was too often perhaps we're focused on the differences and not enough on the similarities. And this is one of the reasons I've always hated the generational differences talks. Because to me, when we focus on those, all we do is create bigger divides when instead of looking at how are we all the same And how are we all in effect trying to achieve the same thing, which in our profession even more so is we're all relatively in the same mission in helping our clients.
Yeah, that generational discussion is astrology without the entertainment value. I think it's ridiculous. I really do. And there's a better framework for it. We can't get into it here, but rather than thinking about horizontally, different generations on the time, think vertically, because we're all aging. We're all climbing up or down, however you want to view it, that vertical axis. What can we learn from the older people? What can the older people teach the younger people? Because the younger people are going to be up there someday. So I like the vertical conception of that rather than the horizontal, because
and to your earlier point, their values are going to change as they get older. What was important to them when they were in college is not necessarily going to be as important to them when they're raising a family.
Yep, exactly. That's exactly right. Yeah. So anyway.
The other thing that I think is important is I think you have to have some self-deprecation in this. You have to be willing to laugh at yourself and the ridiculousness of some of the things that people you may agree with, but they're nuts. And I'm nuts. I'm crazy to believe this, but this is how I feel. It's how you feel. It's okay. It's how you feel. You can disagree agreeably. Okay. And you can have a conversation and have a deeper connection with somebody, and understand what makes them tick. And then hey, we tread lightly around this topic, and maybe we can talk about this topic in here. And so if I'm going to see Ron, maybe I look at the Giants page in the Giants score in the sports page, and that's and if I'm going to see Donnie, I look at the best meal that I've had lately, and if I'm going to see Amy, we're going to trade notes about another topic. The thing about this is that you can't if you don't if you understand somebody, it's a lot easier to motivate them, and it's a lot easier to put in context what they're asking for, and or what you can do for them. And it's a lot easier to find agreement if you're in a situation where you have a low level of trust, and you think the other person hates you because you exist. That's a bad relationship, and that's one you got to work on. And the way you work on it is you talk to people, you do things with them. And even if you think it's stupid to sit out there and play croquet in the middle of some park, you're doing it so that you can have a laugh together and maybe create some kind of connection. Even if you think it's the stupidest sport in the entire world, you go out there and you give it that, and you do stupid things yourself, and you laugh at yourself.
Yeah. Peter Thiel has a great question he likes to ask people before, in the interviewing process. Tell me something you believe that most people don't. That opens up all sorts of vistas of people's psyche. I love that question because you get some really interesting answers, like I believe in UFOs or, whatever it might be. It's a fascinating opening question. And if somebody says, I don't have anything, well, then that tells him something too.
That would worry me a lot more. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. We all have something that we believe in that is probably somewhat out there, whether it's a conspiracy theory or whatever. We're human. We're subject to flaws.
I wonder if that extends to superstitions, because I wouldn't know what to say. I'd be like, that it's bad luck to step on a crack. I'm not sure.
Yeah. But there's no 13th floor.
I smell salt goes over my shoulder.
Like go to Vegas. I don't think there's many 13th floors in the casino because it's just bad luck.
I think that's so funny though. When we really think about critically, there's a 13th floor. It's just not labeled 13.
It's true. There's a great story about a rabbi. He's got two people in front of him and they're arguing, and the first guy makes his case and the rabbi looks at him and says, "You're right." And then the second guy makes his case and rabbi's listening and he finishes and he says, "You're right." And his wife's standing next to him, the rabbi's wife, and she says, "Honey, they both can't be right." And he says, "You're right." Levity negates gravity. It really does. If a conversation is getting too intense, throw some humor in there. And that's one thing that we all bond over as humans. I mean, think about what a comedian's doing. He's trying to choke you, literally trying to choke you. So you lose your breath and, you're gagging because humor's uncontrollable. It's the purest form of confession.
But yeah, if you think about it, a comedian they're really the ultimate storyteller because they can tell you things about yourself that you don't want to hear, and you laugh at it, and you leave having learned something about yourself and them, and sometimes all the people around you. And as long as you let yourself laugh, if you're going to say something may offend them, guess what? Somebody else is going to say something that may offend you. Just don't get offended. So if you
Right.
decide that you're not going to get offended, okay, great. Let's just go.
You guys know John Garrett, right? Stand-up CPA comedian. Him and Greg Kite are about the only two I can think of. I know there's a few more, I think. But anyway, John Garrett told me something very interesting at a conference where he spoke and created some public blowback for some of his comments. And he said, when we were talking about it, he said, the person wasn't offended by me. They were offended because the rest of the audience laughed. And I thought that was an incredibly insightful comment, that they weren't necessarily mad at him, but because everybody else laughed and they didn't.
But there are different kinds of laughs too. There's maybe they were laughed, and maybe where they live, the way they laughed is the uncomfortable laugh, like, okay, as
Right,
opposed
right.
to as opposed to I'm actually laughing out loud because this is funny. Um, it I think again, I think we have to go out there and we have to put on our Kevlar and just understand that people are going to say things that are going to hurt our feelings. And that's the cost of living in a free society where you can speak your mind. Is that you now discuss it, and people may disagree with you, but they want to know why, because they want to connect with you. Is that so awful?
That's verging into a whole nother topic, but I do agree with you on that, because that's one of the things when I look at the free speech, we talk about it all the time, but a lot of times what we see in these political conversations is that free speech is not fully allowed. And I always find it interesting, for example, that and I can't think of their name. The ones that are always for civil rights, and they actually defended, was it the neo-Nazis in
Mm,
the U.S.
Yeah,
because
yeah. It's
they felt that
the ACLU
yeah,
ACLU, thank
the
you,
yeah.
ACLU
right?
defended the Nazis in the 1970s, because they wanted to march in the town of Skokie, Illinois, where a lot of Holocaust survivors lived. And again, it's that offends me. But I I think at the point we tell other people what they have to think, and at the point we don't allow them to say something, then we just create, we're all in this together. And as soon as we put those walls up, of, well, you're this and I'm that, and you've got this and I'm this, the more walls we put up, the more we forget that we are all in this together and we all have to get along. And isn't it a lot more fun when you get along with people, even if you don't agree with them on everything, if you can just talk to them and you can laugh about something? I mean, it's it's amazing to me.
I did find there were a few tips that I found as far as trying to either start that conversation or make it as comfortable as possible. And one of the things that they suggested was making sure that it said set the stage, but it's basically making sure that you're not in a situation where either you or the anybody that you're trying to engage with is in a stressful situation or is in a kind of a hurried situation, because anything like that kind of prohibits them from engaging more fully, and they're already kind of at a high stress alert and don't necessarily want to continue a conversation that may trigger some of their trauma points. So that was one of the things. And one of the things that we've already talked about was affirmation, or making sure that you show that person respect so that they know, I respect you and I respect your opinions and I want to learn from you. That kind of opens it up a little bit more. And then what we all learn in basic communication, as far as making direct eye contact, having an open posture, making sure that person knows that you're open to receiving what they're trying to communicate to you and with you. Check your assumptions. Try not to assume anything. Of course, we already know what they say about assuming. And then if they tell you something that they believe in, explore that to the depth of what's the essential nugget in their belief there. What is it that their core belief that is attached to that, and not what extraneous thing am I attaching to it because of my background or my beliefs. And then lastly is what we've already said, which is seek to understand and not to persuade. As long as you're not going into it being like, I'm going to change this person's mind and I'm going to make them believe my way, and you understand, no, that's never going to happen. But at least we can learn from each other. Then that creates a better dialogue.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I love the line, and I don't know who said this, but argue with conviction, listen as if you were wrong.
Oh, that's good
That
too.
too.
One of the things, just as an example, one of the things that came out of my conversation with Donnie, we started discussing our families and some attributes that our families have. And there was a commonality that we discussed, and I'm not going to share it because it's not mine to share, but it's we were able to connect on that related topic because we started the conversation, and we were just trying to just talk to each other and pass the time. And I have a new respect for Donnie, knowing what I know now from that conversation, because there's a bigger why, and there's a sacrifices that he's made in his life that I never understood before. And I don't know, it's a lot of the people we hang out with are pretty doggone amazing. And, you know, we don't have to agree on everything, but there's always something that you can find about somebody that's actually pretty interesting and pretty amazing, that they've done in their life. And so it's, um, I don't know. I think we spend so much time worrying about what somebody is not, instead of worrying about what they are. And you
First,
know,
thank you, Brian, and likewise to you. But one of the things I want to point out from that was it's interesting because we started the conversation effectively on something that we disagree on and ended up finding this commonality at the end. So there was that bridge that occurred, but it never would have happened if we didn't have start off the conversation.
not only
Yeah.
that, I don't think it's a good look when you can't talk to the people next to you. I don't think it's a good look for anybody. I don't know. I don't
And
know.
and plus, do we learn anything when we're talking only to people who we agree with? I learn the most from people I disagree with, or throw an idea out that I've never heard before or never thought about before. Those are the people that have really ended up changing my mind. Now, maybe it didn't happen that in a dinner conversation. I mean, if you can change a mind in an hour, it's not much of a mind. But it might have put a chink in the armor and made me think about it and go research it deeper. And ultimately, yeah, I see that point of view now. I never saw that before. And those are magical moments. I mean, those are human moments. And I don't want to give that up. And that's what free speech enables us. The test of free speech is, not listening to what you want to hear, but listening to the stuff you don't want to hear. Like the Skokie March, which, by the way, didn't take place after all that. They
But
never
it
marched.
was mocked in the Blues Brothers.
Yeah,
Uh,
true.
it was the mocking in the Blues Brothers was absolutely epic.
Yeah.
Um, anyway,
Well,
if you haven't
that's,
watched that
yeah.
movie, one of the only non-offensive places you're going to see Nazis in a movie, because the Blues Brothers try to run them over with their car. But it's I don't know. I think there's something to laugh at on everything, and you know, I it's we live in a great country, and that group that you and I were at, Donnie, and Ron used to be a member of that group, and Amy, I hope to see you there someday. There are a lot of really interesting people that have done crazy things in their lives, and they're just cool. And the cool thing is that you can, if you don't have that conversation, if you just sit there and talk about the weather and, oh, I like those shoes, you're never going to get to that point.
And that's a very diverse group politically as well.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
We've covered a lot. I think we heard some really great advice for everyone. Just to wrap up, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, and we'll go in the same order as the intros. Amy, how should someone get in touch with you if they want to talk to you some more?
I am on LinkedIn, and my email address is amy@enterprise.us.
Ron?
People can find me at thresholdnow.com, and you can email me at ron@thresholdnow.com.
Thank you. Brian?
And I'm BFT CPA on most of the socials, and you can reach me, Brian, at BRIAN@BFTCPA.com.
Thank you all. Love this conversation. And for all of you listening, thanks for joining us again for another episode of Transformation Talks.
The Center for Accounting Transformation provides business professionals with a network for utilizing innovations that are ready for adoption, the training and resources necessary to apply those innovations, and an opportunity to engage the talent and community needed to further the pursuit of innovative accounting practices that drive responsible and mindful business performance. Find out more at our website, www.improvetheworld.net. And if you're interested in sharing your own transformation stories, please contact us there.